think so. Thank you. Good morning.
Well, good. Good. Always good to see you. So today we talk about, all the subjects are serious, of course, but something that affects a lot of people, and it is serious, and it's depression, which is not to be confused with disappointment, I guess, momentary sorrow that the Buckeyes lost or something like that.
Right.
That's not really depression.
Yeah, we call those adjustment disorders, and those can happen, when you're adjusting to a change in lifestyle. Something tragic happens and it's short term. Of course, you're going to grieve at the loss of a loved one or a loss of a job, but depression, from a clinical standpoint, is kind of when the lights just go out. Something happens, and sometimes you can't identify the trigger, but you can't get motivated. You lose pleasure in everything. You don't want to be out with your friends. You stay in bed and stay in your PJs all day long, and you just have no motivation. You feel sad, overwhelmed, overcome. This dark cloud kind of follows you. That's the clinical depression that when we see that, we know these people are going to need more than counseling. They're probably going to need medical treatment. Have
we seen increased onset of this in the pandemic?
I think for those that have this underlying chemical imbalance, yes, it's triggered, and often we don't see this in the office. We see these. What we see are these people present to the emergency room after a drug overdose or too much alcohol, or maybe some kind of a domestic situation where the police are called because they're trying to cope in ways that unfortunately are not healthy ways to cope, but that's how they'll cope. They turn to a substance maybe to help them.
And certainly alcohol, which is a depressant itself.
Exactly, yes. So we have to be really careful with that and understand that sometimes those behaviors that for most of us we look at like, how would you do something like that? Well, they don't feel good. They're trying to change how they're feeling, and maybe they don't have the coping skills that some of us have. And so they have these behaviors that most of us would think, I would never do something like that. But when you feel bad chemically, you're liable to do lots of things. And of course, suicide is another potential risk for people who feel this real clinical depression. So there's a whole spectrum of conditions, as you mentioned. The sadness when the Buckeyes lose, up to the sadness that you feel at the passing of a loved one or a divorce or loss of a job. And then again, there's that clinical depression where I just say the lights go out. And I demonstrate it in the office by literally turning the switch out, the light switch off, and it's dark, and it's quick, and it hits you without any warning sometimes. And again, that's not something that positive mental attitude or talking to a family member necessarily is going to help you with. That's when you need medication.
How do you know? Well, I guess you realize that you're not enjoying life at all. Just you need to find some help as quickly as possible is the first thing.
Exactly. Yes. And the medications that we have, there's 4 or 5 different classes, and the newer classes really do a pretty good job. Within 2 or 3 weeks, it can lift you right out and just make all the difference. And sometimes we don't get it right with the first medication, but usually, 1 or 2 trials of an antidepressant usually works pretty good. Sometimes you have to watch for not only does it bring you out of the depression, but sometimes it sort of depresses those up times when you feel happy and joyful and like you want to feel. Sometimes it reduces those or squishes those down a little bit so you don't quite have the same highs. So, it's not, these medications are not without some side effects or things to be careful of. But
they're kind of compressors with not too many highs and not too many lows.
Right. And the people that are low, they'll take that because they don't want to feel low. But they'll also say, gosh, I haven't really laughed at a good joke in a while, and I haven't watched a comedy show and really thought it was funny, so that's just something to be aware of. A lot of people with these antidepressants, they'll feel a little bit of fatigue. They can have some sexual dysfunction. Initially, there's almost always some intestinal issues, nausea, some diarrhea, gas, bloating, and that passes pretty quickly. And most people tolerate that fine. But it's really a matter of, does it work? Is it helping you in 2 or 3 weeks? Are you feeling at least 50 to 75% better? If not, we go up on the dose or we try another class or another medication to bring you out. But as far as the pandemic goes, I think of a lot of us are feeling down, and then we live in Ohio, and it's cloudy and it's cold, and the winters are long, and we just want sunshine. We want freedom. We want to be able to interact with our friends and go to a movie, go to a restaurant without feeling like we have all these restrictions on us. And that really is not the same as depression. That's an adjustment to a difficult situation. That's where our friends and maybe a counselor or clergy or somebody can help walk us through those difficult times. And we need to be open with our feelings. Some people are more open and honest with themselves than others. A lot of people just suppress it and they grit through life. But I think they suffer more than they need to.
Could somebody with the clinical chemical, I don't know, if say they're at risk, would that maybe trigger them to step further though?
Sure.
And why does the Christmas season do that?
Well, I think a lot of times it's about expectations, and especially at the holidays, you have these Norman Rockwell images of this is what it's like for happy, functional families. And when my family comes, my uncle is always critical of his sister, my mom, and there's arguing and fighting, and the kids aren't showing up like I thought they would, and I put in all this time in for a meal, and people didn't even say thank you, and so and all this stress involved, and I think that sets us up for a lot of disappointment because the expectation is, we want things to turn out a certain way, and it doesn't. And I heard your piece earlier on the news today about the study of Brigham Young University, where girls in particular who on social media, they really struggle. And I call this social media pornography. It's this idea that the life that you live is not normal because everybody else is living happy, and if you don't live that way, then there must be something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And it's all an illusion. That's why I call it pornography.
Right.
I'm not going to say all of it, but much of it is. And the stories that we write, like this would be normal if I had this in my life, I'd be happy. Well, most people are a little bit dysfunctional in some way at some time. We all need a little bit of guidance, a little bit of counseling. And
you're not going to post every bad thing that happens to you.
Of course not. No. You're going to show the kids, dressed and all smiling, and everything's clean and it's perfect. And it's very rare for any of us to have that type of a life all the time.
But again, it can lead people down the wrong path.
Yeah, and they start telling these stories that I have it bad. I'm not like this family and this family. I've even gone through that, and it's tough. It'll take you to a dark place, and you have to be really careful. And I think the best remedy for those feelings, when you're feeling kind of sorry for yourself, is service. If you get out and you help somebody else, you do something for somebody else, forget about your own wants and needs, and you're just trying to lift somebody else. That is such a powerful, effective remedy that I think we overlook. But I know, at least for me, that it always changes my outlook. But when we're talking about clinical depression, those things don't work. That's a chemical switch that has to be addressed. And some people, especially if they have depression in their family, they're more vulnerable to it. There's a biochemical predisposition. So those people have to stay on guard. And if you've got it in your family, you start to feel like you're dropping off, just get in and see somebody. The medications typically will put you on these medications to lift you out of this dark cloud, this depression. And I usually say, let's try it for about 6 months. Let's get you confident that your life isn't as bad as you think it is. And often in the summer when the sun's out and you're out doing things, it's a good time to wean people off or see if they can come off. But if you do nothing with depression, what we find is that typically those chemical depressions that make you feel awful, they'll come back up and you'll lift out of that. And then you might go 5 years and then drop back down into it for a year or 6 months. Then you lift back out of it. But what happens is when it's untreated, these lows start to get more and more frequent, and it gets harder and harder to come out of it. And if you keep putting this off, it's really hard to treat. So you should treat it right away, mm-hmm. and maybe for a short period of time, and discuss this with your medical provider, and then try to come off of it. And if you feel okay, stay off of it until you experience it again, if you do. And if you do, then don't be afraid to be treated for it, because if you're not, boy, it's just tough. And with these antidepressants, a lot of times Somebody will start them on an antidepressant, a patient on an antidepressant, and 5 years later they're still on the same medication,
Yeah.
and they're starting to not feel as good. Well, your body will become, I'm not going to say immune, but you will not respond to the same way after a while. The receptors, the chemistry changes, it doesn't work. We can raise the dose till we max it out, but eventually any antidepressant is going to fail over time. And so you have to look for something else. So that's one of the reasons I say let's treat it for the short term, fix the biochemistry, and then come off of it and go as long as you can without treatment until you need it again, because it can be effective. But nobody should suffer with depression.
Hey, helping other people, that could release some endorphins and
It
help
really
take care of
does.
things.
That's one of the reasons why food is such a good antidepressant, because it makes you feel good,
Yeah, it
until you can't get your pants on, So then you're dealing with a different type of depression.
Back to that again.
Yeah, but those endorphins, they come from doing kind things to other people. They come from exercise. They come from laughter. Anything that lifts your spirits, that gets you off of your current challenges and problems, can be really, really helpful.
Hey, well, thanks for the insight into that, because I think sometimes we get mixed up about what really is depression and what's just feeling a little depressed.
Yeah, we use that word pretty freely,
Yeah.
and it's not the same to a clinician as it is to many of us that just throw the term around.
All right. Well, we thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
That is Dr. Tim McKnight this morning here on Talk with the Doc, which has been brought to you by Mako's Pharmacy, offering their customers and community free assistance with comparing and selecting a plan based on your specific prescription needs. Call Mako's Pharmacy. Their number is 740-922-5400.